Well, folks, our next speaker is the president and CEO of First Liberty Institute, another one of our awesome sponsors here at the Values Voters Summit. And it is the largest legal firm in the nation dedicated to exclusively protecting religious freedom of all Americans. Under his leadership, First Liberty's legal team has participated in cases before the United States Supreme Court, federal courts of appeal, federal district courts, and various state courts, where they have won more than 90% of their cases representing our values. In fact, we'd like to just show you a very quick overview of the work of First Liberty Institute. Please look at the monitors and let's watch together.
It's ironic that in a country founded on religious liberty, that we now find religious liberty under attack as never before in our nation's history.
It's America's religious freedom that lays the foundation for all of our freedoms. Religious freedom is the first phrase of the First Amendment to our U.S. Constitution.
There is a clear attempt by certain groups and organizations, and at times even our government, to curtail our religious liberties. I have personally been on the front lines in the battle for religious freedom for over 25 years, and yet I've never seen anything like the attacks we're seeing today.
According to our study, between 2011 and 2015, attacks on religious liberty in our country actually doubled. And here at First Liberty, requests for legal help tripled last year.
Since 1997, First Liberty Institute has been the champion protecting religious freedom for all Americans, winning cases at every judicial level, including cases before the United States Supreme Court. At First Liberty, we're fighting to make sure that these Americans have the freedom they need to express their faith in every area of life without fear of legal attack.
And when there's attack on your religious liberty, we are there to defend and protect your religious freedom. And when we do, we win 9 out of 10 cases. Our mission at First Liberty Institute is to restore the vision that the founders had for true freedom. That true freedom is protecting religious liberty for all Americans.
By God's grace, there is hope for religious freedom in America, and First Liberty Institute offers that hope. Join us today. Go to firstliberty.org to find out how you can become more involved in protecting religious liberty for all Americans.
Let's hear it for First Liberty. And now, would you please welcome the President and CEO, Kelly Shackelford.
As you heard, First Liberty Institute is the largest legal organization in the country that all we do is religious freedom. And wow, is there a lot to do, unfortunately, in this day and age. How did I get involved in this? It really goes back to high school for me. When I was in high school, I knew my gifts were in analytical thinking and speaking, and I thought, well, I either need to be a pastor or a lawyer. And people said, that's like a God or Satan choice, isn't it? And as I really looked, I felt the Lord clearly directed me towards law, and I got out of law school and started doing this kind of work. Really, it's something I would have never planned to do, but it was something I was being directed to do. But I had no idea what we would be fighting 27 years later. You couldn't have convinced me of these things. So let me set the basis first, because this is bigger than just people of faith. Religious freedom is important to every American. How do you tell your friends or somebody you know, your neighbors, that aren't people of faith? What if they said, is this important to me? Because I don't go to church or synagogue. I'm not a person of faith. The answer is absolutely. Our founders called this our first freedom, because they understood if you lose this freedom, you'll lose all your freedoms. The one thing that totalitarianism will never allow are citizens who hold an allegiance to one higher than the government. So whenever that type of oppressive, anti-freedom, totalitarian regime begins to come into place, the first flashpoint is always religious freedom. I speak all around the country, and I can't tell you how many people come up to me from Eastern European countries and other places around the world, and they say, I saw this happen in my country. I'm not a person of faith like you are, but I think that what you're doing here is the most important thing anybody is doing in this country. I watched it happen. They took the religious symbols down and they put up the secular symbols, and within months we lost our political freedoms as well. So this is something about the freedoms of everybody in this country, even if they're not a person of faith. So this being so crucial, this being sort of the core freedom that really is the first freedom of our country, how are we doing? Well, I probably don't have to convince you that I've never seen anything like the attacks we're seeing now. You've seen, pastors' sermons being subpoenaed, right? Our newest case, or one of our newest cases, is a woman who was actually told by police that she was not allowed to pray in her own home. We have cases now, 27 years ago, if you'd have told me, you're going to have to represent churches, I would have said, this isn't the USSR. We don't represent churches versus the government. Now we probably average 2 new churches a week we have to represent. You probably saw the recent one where we had to represent churches in Iowa, where the state of Iowa actually, this was in writing. It wasn't a theory. It wasn't something somebody said. They put in writing that they were taking control and had authority within the church, that they were places of public accommodation, that they now had to meet their LGBT rules, including now the state could tell them how they could do their bathrooms, what they could preach from their pulpit on these issues to make sure that it wasn't, quote, discriminatory. And again, this is in Iowa. It's not in Massachusetts or Rhode Island or somewhere where you might expect a little more hostility. This is in Iowa. So this is happening all across the country. We do a survey every year of all the attacks going on. It's called Undeniable. And this has everything from a 5-year-old girl who was ordered to stop praying over her meal in the lunch cafeteria to senior citizens who were actually told that their federally funded meals were going to be taken away from them because they were praying over their meals. And since they were federally funded, that would violate separation of church and state. It's in every area of our country. It's the north, the south, the east, the west. It's people who are poor, people who are rich. It's people of all colors. It's incredible what's going on. And these are just the ones that are published. These are the ones that made the newspaper, the case books. Really, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So we've got a real issue going on. And this is before the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage, which has now opened up all these new streams of litigation about whether people who hold to these beliefs of marriage are going to be allowed to be punished by the government in different ways because they hold those beliefs. You've heard about many of the cases already going around the country. One of our cases is the Kleins. They've been to value voters. Oregon bakers who had a bakery and ran it according to their faith, and they had this couple that came to them, these 2 women, and they knew they were a lesbian couple, and they served them gladly and loved them. But then when they asked for a wedding cake, they said, because of our faith, we're not allowed to make a wedding cake and participate in a wedding that is not consistent with our faith. It's a sacred issue, the issue of marriage. But we'll give you a referral. We'll make sure you get that service. The next thing you know, many of you have heard this, they've been fined now $135,000. They're bankrupt. And the judge ordered them not to speak publicly about their beliefs on marriage. We're now on appeal. We just filed the last brief just in the last couple of days. And this is going all the way through up the Oregon Court of Appeals. But these are the kinds of battles that are going on. So I thought, what's a way I can quickly get to you kind of how things are moving? And I thought, let's take 2 areas very quickly, and I'll just tell you our newest cases. Take the area of schools and education. Our newest case, and I want you to listen to what I'm saying here, is 2 Christian schools, 2 Christian private schools, who are in the state championship in football in the state of Florida, and were ordered by the state of Florida not to pray before their football game. We're now going to find out in the next week or so whether they're going to leave us no choice but to sue them and inform the state of Florida that they too are responsible to follow the United States Constitution and the First Amendment. Everybody's heard probably of the Coach Kennedy case. Coach Joe Kennedy, 20 years in the Marines, came out, watched a movie that really affected him the night before his first day on the job as a coach, facing the Giants. And he said, God, I'm going to make a commitment to you. After every game, when we go to the center of the field, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a knee and just give thanks to you for the privilege of coaching these young men. And that's what he's done for 8 years. Until the school said, if you go to a knee, we're going to fire you. and he went to a knee, and he's now been fired. And we've now had to file a federal lawsuit. They told him, could you speak to the other coaches? Sure he could. Could you talk about anything you wanted? Sure. Could you slap him on the back? The one thing he was told he could not do is pray. When the government tells a citizen of this country that you can do anything you want, but if you pray, we will fire you, that is a massive violation of the Constitution, and it would take away the rights of every employee all across the country that works for state, local, federal government. It's a very important case for the future of our country. In addition, for the future of coaches to be able to be who they are in their faith. So that's a quick feel for kind of the types of battles. And again, we could go through case after case after case. What about the military? You've seen all these attacks on veterans' memorials. We've had to defend the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial, which we successfully were able to defend, and it's still up. The Mount Soledad Memorial outside of San Diego, which is now going to stand forever as a result of the litigation that failed by the ACLU. And now you see the Gettysburg Cross. This is not too far from where we stand right now. This is a memorial that was put up over 90 years ago, in part by the money from mothers who lost their sons in World War I. And now the American Humanist Association has filed a lawsuit to have this torn down. The good news is we won a very strong decision at the federal district court, but now we're at the federal court of appeals, and we'll have to see what happens as a result of that. Now, some of you, the cross case that you just saw, that's just the beginning of what's happened in the military. It's not just symbols. We just argued at the highest military court in the country on behalf of a Marine who was court-martialed because she would not remove a scripture verse from her personal workspace. She was court-martialed. The highest military court just upheld that. They said that they want to insert a new requirement for religious freedom, which they have no authority to do, that you have to get approval from your superiors before you can engage in the exercise of religion. What a novel concept. We all now have to get approval from the government before we can exercise our religion. Needless to say, we're appealing this directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. And then one more case, which I'm going to show you the video of here in just a few minutes, the newest case, where Oscar Rodriguez was actually physically assaulted and thrown out of a ceremony because he was going to mention God in a military retirement ceremony. So the things that are going on in the military, it just shows you how quickly things are moving. Now, the good news is that we have a method of dealing with this, and it's working. It's not just a theory. And that is, if you were to look at the legal nonprofit groups around the country that are left-wing, right-wing, whatever their issue is, they do the same model. Raise as much money as they can raise, hire as many attorneys as they can, put those attorneys in an office in Washington, D.C., or New York, or L.A., and then fly them around the country and cover as many cases as they can cover. That is not our model. Our model is there's all these people of faith who went to law school because they wanted to stand for what was right. And 30 years later, these are now literally the best litigators at the best law firms in the country, in fact, in the world. And they've done honorable work for people who've paid them, but they've never gotten to do a case for their faith or their country. So we go to them and we sit down and we say, look, if we give you everything you need, are you willing to give your time on one of these cases for religious freedom for our country? They're like, man, I've been waiting 35 years. Sign me up. We know what's going to happen when they take that first case. For the first time in their life, all their talent, their gifts, their training is lined up with their faith and their love for their country. They have never felt that before. And it's kind of unfair, but we now know we have them for the rest of their lives as one of our volunteer attorneys, because they've got to do another one. And they give cover to the younger attorneys who now are allowed to work on the cases because they're the bigger partners and the experienced attorneys. And they get to taste what it's like. So if you were to look at the major law firms in this country and just go down the list, a significant percentage of those firms don't just donate their time, they fight each other over who gets to donate their time on these cases. My original goal in doing that is I thought we can get a lot more done. We can really leverage our resources. And that's true. On an average case, for every 10,000 we spend, we get 60,000 donated. So we really are able to multiply the resources. But what I didn't count on was the win-loss ratio. If you watch the nonprofit industry of all the law firms that are out there, whether the ACLU or whoever, you'll find that they'll win a case, they'll lose a case. They'll win, they'll lose. Overall, you'll find they're about 50-50. Well, our win rate for over 15 years in a row has been above 90%. And that's because, number one, God's grace and God's favor. But it's because of this method. This method is really, a method, the body of Christ method. It's people giving of themselves for others. And the result of this is when we have a case in Montana, our attorney lives in Montana. He's with the biggest law firm in Montana. When he goes into court and he looks at the judge, they were in elementary school together and lost a tooth together in second grade. So when the ACLU guy flies in from New York City, he's not exactly as familiar with the surroundings, with the jury, with everything else, with how things work. And so it's a huge advantage. It's how all the major corporations do their cases. If Ford Motor Company in Detroit was sued in Oregon, they wouldn't send their attorneys from Detroit. They would get the best attorneys in Oregon. And so we do this method that works, and it's working. You add the talent of these attorneys, top in the country, that they live in these communities, that they're giving of themselves, that they care, and that this country was founded on religious freedom, and all the law and the history backs that. We should win these cases. We should win these cases. So I just want to point out, you see a lot of bad news. Let me show you some slides. When we started going national, this is about 5 years ago, we'd beaten the ACLU in every lawsuit we'd been in. And the problem was they were $120 million and we were $3.5 million. And so we got to grow. We got to grow fast because the need is out there. So flip to the next slide, if you will, for folks to look at. So we had all of our supporters because we started in Texas, about 3,000 people. Now I want you to show you just a few years later what we have as far as this army that's growing all over the country of people to get involved. Everywhere I go, people are like, okay, this is something I care about. This is something I can be involved in, and it's succeeding. And it's about the future of the country. They're like, join me up. I'm joining the Army. Well, what's fun about this Army is it's allowing us to help more people, set more precedents, have more impact all across the country. Let me show you where we were when we started. Again, these were the cases when we were just starting to go national and said, we've got to help all over the country. Now let me show you, because of all those extra people you just saw, where we were at the end of this last year. You can see, and that was, we went from 260 legal matters in 2014 to 513 legal matters in 2015, and 513 legal matters was turning away 90% of the request. So the need is huge. We're growing as fast as we can, but I want you to be encouraged by that because it is working. So when you look at this, realize it's working. There's only one issue. Are we willing to stand? If people are willing to stand, we're winning. The law, the history, the Constitution backs religious freedom. The First Amendment is here to stay. We just have to be willing to stand for that. So let me show you the newest case, the case I mentioned in the military of Oscar Rodriguez.
I knew that very early in life that there was something incredibly special about this country. When I was a child, during baseball games, one of the most emotional parts of that was the national anthem. And I always tried to hide my tears from my brothers because I knew that many men died for that freedom to be able to have a hot dog and watch a baseball game. And when you see that flag waving, it resonated in me. And I knew that I had to be there. I had to participate in this. So I knew that when I turned 18, I was going to join the military.
Well, Oscar Rodriguez is a decorated 33-year Air Force veteran and a retiree now. And he has a history of giving very stirring and moving flag-folding speeches at military events and civic events throughout the community.
One of the individuals that came up to me and shook my hands, he was going to retire. He says, Sergeant Rodriguez, I've heard that speech on CDs. I heard it in person a long time ago. It would just be wonderful if you could do that for my family. And I looked at him and I said, absolutely.
As a private citizen and an Air Force veteran, Oscar has the right under the First Amendment to engage in speech, including religious speech.
To have my fellow family throw me out of the ceremony because of the mention of God is beyond me.
When Master Sergeant Roberson's commanding officer found out that Oscar was going to be performing this flag-folding speech that was going to mention the word God, he took steps to have Oscar banned from the ceremony, and when he found out that he didn't have the legal authority to ban Oscar, a private citizen, from this ceremony, he then had members of his command in uniform show up to remove Oscar.
I stood up, went to my position, faced the audience, and this individual comes up to me and he says, "You're not going to do this, are you?" I'm thinking, so what is he talking about? That I'm really going to do what? Mention God? Yeah, I'm really going to do that. As soon as I hear my cue, I start with my speech. And they grab me, and they pull me, they assault me as the flag is open because I dare to mention God.
The tragic irony here is that flag-folding speech talks about the fact that the United States flag stands for freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. And it was those very words that resulted in Oscar being assaulted and forcibly dragged away by men wearing the uniform of the United States Air Force, men who are sworn to protect people like Oscar and their right to engage in that very speech. Our military service members make huge sacrifices to defend our freedoms every day. We're committed to defending the religious freedom of every U.S. military man, woman, and veteran, just like Oscar.
It is this one nation under God that we call with honor the United States of America. God bless our flag. God bless our troops. God bless America.
Oscar Rodriguez is standing. Coach Joe Kennedy is standing. Multitudes of other people we're representing across the country, they're standing. My question to you is, will you stand with them? I encourage you, if you haven't, to join us. FirstLiberty.org is our website. I know people will watch this on C-SPAN or on the internet. I encourage them, go there, sign up, make sure you're connected to this battle. Make sure you're standing with Oscar Rodriguez and Coach Joe Kennedy. If you're here, I hope you'll fill out our card. Come by our booth. Come to our breakfast tomorrow. Oscar's going to be at the breakfast. So is Chaplain Wes Motter, another hero, as well as Coach Joe Kennedy, so you can meet some of these people in person. But I just encourage you, when they stand, we have to stand with them. And if we do, we will win. So I want to ask you, everybody here who's willing to make sure and stand with them, come sign up, connect, raise your hand and say, I'm going to stand with you, I'm going to be involved. Come by the booth, we'd love to see you. Pray for us, pray for these cases, and let us know if we can ever help you, because we can win these battles if we're willing to stand up. God bless you.